But anyway, I go to this guy and I'm thinking we're going to do this talk therapy and he's going to help me fix all my problems and answer all my questions, right? I'm like, this guy's going to tell me how to fix my depression, my anxiety, my stress, all this stuff. And I sit down with this guy and I swear to God, he red-pilled me that day, man. He red-pilled me. And you know how he did it? With a raisin.
Oh, hello there. I'm Jimmy Shuker, alongside Albert Chalmers and Shawn Goodman. And this is Radiant Light, a spiritual discussion podcast, episode 24. On today's episode, all three members of the Radiant Light panel are back together for a roundtable discussion about a topic which is relevant to both our current theme of staying in the present moment and also the mental health division of the Radiant Light podcast. Today, we will be discussing mindfulness. Enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Radiant Light podcast. We would like to make a huge announcement or a big milestone, if you will. Radiant Light is now officially 1 year old. And of course, we would like to thank all of our listeners, all of our viewers, all of our subscribers for all your fantastic support so far. Obviously, the guys would like to say a few things as well.
Domo arigato gozaimasu.
Well, thank you to the listeners, but also thank you both, Albert and Jimmy, for having me on and bringing me on as a junior partner in this. And it's been a really enlightening journey, and I look forward to all the episodes we're going to have in the next year together.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you to you both as well. This obviously the show doesn't work without you guys and with all our listeners as well and viewers. Just so grateful that we can be here today and have the opportunity to pass on this wisdom and Zen that we're learning about and continue to learn every day. And like you said, Shawn, over the next year or so. Firstly, to our audience as well, please do hang in with us right till the end, because once we're through with the topic of mindfulness, we'll also be previewing a few upcoming episodes that we have down the road here in Radiant Light with a few nice surprises that we've thrown in. Mindfulness is all about being in the present moment without judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. Mindfulness is something that I've been exploring myself recently. I know the previous episodes that I've been on, it's been much more focused on the history of, the samurai, Shaolin, Confucianism. So this one is less of an academic interest of mine and more of a personal one. Trying to find ways to, cope with stress in the modern world, trying to find ways to be more present in the moment. So I'd like to just start off by saying I'm not an expert in this field by any means. So I thought it would be interesting, though, perhaps to for us to, discuss our thoughts on it, and maybe our listeners can get kind of a beginner's insight, because a lot of times these topics, they can be really daunting, really big. There's mountains of books and theories and historical and religious connections. So sometimes perhaps, disentangling that might be a little bit overwhelming. At least it was for me. So I thought perhaps I could give some of my perspectives, what I've been learning, and maybe some goals we have moving forward.
And there's always a full disclaimer here on Radiant Light that we are very much of the beginner's mindset. We're three guys kind of taking a dive into these topics, and we're very much newbie.
This is the book that I picked up. So it's called Full Catastrophe Living by Jon Kabat-Zinn. So yeah, I can give you some of my opinions on that book. It's a pretty thick book. It's about 600 odd pages, so I haven't quite completed it yet. But it's been a fascinating read. So I guess before we get into that, it's important to clarify the two different concepts here. We have mindfulness and we have meditation. So the two concepts, they're really, inextricably linked with one another, but they're not interchangeable terms. They refer to two different things. So mindfulness is more of a state of being, whereas meditation is the practice. And of course, there's different types of meditation, right? There's not just one type of meditation. You can do a mindfulness-based meditation, but there's also other forms of meditation as well.
And so when you say a mindfulness-based meditation, you mean kind of that practice of being in the present moment, doing something, for example, be completely absorbed in making a cup of tea, for example.
Yeah, so that's a good example. That would be a good way to practice mindfulness. So again, that would be more on the practice side. That might not necessarily be meditation, but the act of paying attention to what you're doing, focusing on that present moment. Maybe I have this cup of tea here, which is yerba mate, which I've been kind of hooked on recently. But normally with a lot of these things, like I drink a lot of tea, I drink a lot of coffee. I've always had a slight affinity towards caffeine. So normally for me, I'll just drink a cup of coffee pretty quickly. I'm just sort of slurping it down in the morning. But to be doing it more mindfully would be to focus on the taste of the tea, the flavor, the sensation in your mouth, maybe the warmth. Well, this is like room temperature now, unfortunately, but in the morning, focusing on that heat, that sensation, really getting lost in that moment and trying to focus on that particular experience and not getting distracted, not getting sidetracked, not getting engulfed in other thoughts and doing things mindlessly. So that would be an example of more of the state of being mindful, whereas the meditation would involve, again, similarities with other forms of meditation. You're probably going to be seated or lying down. Perhaps your eyes are going to be closed, taking deep breaths, things we would associate with other forms. But like I said, there's different types of meditation, right? People might meditate with a religious idea in mind. They might want to meditate to be, closer to God or some sort of divine state. There might be some sort of spiritual significance to it. Whereas in this case, it's much more based upon trying to be present in the moment, trying to recognize your thoughts. So again, that's what I meant by it's only one type of meditation.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about what you said with being in that moment and tasting the coffee and really fixating your attention on that action that you're doing in the present moment, because I feel like the biggest distractions that we would have from that moment that's taking away our enjoyment of the coffee would be the thoughts in our own head, replaying old arguments from the day before, perhaps a disagreement at work or something or other. And, who needs it at the end of the day? It's much more beneficial to be zen and be in the moment and just let it go, whatever happened previously. You can't change it, right?
Precisely. And yeah, these sort of, it's natural, right, to feel maybe anxious about something you have to do throughout the day, maybe to think back and I regret this action I took earlier. So these sort of thoughts are very natural, right? And to an extent, if they're not causing you harm, they can be just a natural process that we have. But it's when people become really fixated on them, right, that this can lead to, exacerbating your anxiety, your depression, your mental health. And so I think that's a big focus of mindfulness, these kind of mindfulness-based practices, is to try to, recognize these thoughts and these emotions. So again, I'm just beginning my journey here. But I suppose I was reflecting on it both for myself, thinking about, okay, these are things that you often worry about. These are times that you feel really anxious, that you feel, distressed. These are situations that, you feel distressed over, which again, feeling distress in a particular situation is normal, but then like you mentioned earlier, the fact if you continue to ruminate on it, then this can be detrimental. If you keep thinking for something happens and then days later you're still thinking about it, you're still thinking, oh, I can't believe I did this, oh, this person said this to me and it was just the wrong thing and this is an injustice. And I think it's a good way to try to recognize these thoughts, right? To try to perhaps let it go and to try to I guess improve your mood, improve your mental health. So there's the personal part for me, but then there's also as well that this is something that in my education program we talked about in relation to students, and trying to tell students, trying to teach them about having a growth mindset, trying to teach them that failure is not the worst thing. You can learn from your failures. You can learn from your mistakes. You don't always have to be perfect, but you need to, you should be able to grow as a person based upon maybe some mistakes that you made. So I was also reflecting on that as well. And I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to perhaps try to help my students, try to help promote this social emotional learning in the classroom, try to help support their mental health, I was thinking, well, this is something I should probably be practicing myself too, exploring for myself. Because if you tell someone, oh, you should do this, then it's do as I say, not do as I do, right? And so I think I would feel, I think I would just feel more, I guess, confident to my ability to try to help students if I myself had a better understanding of some of these practices. So these were sort of the two areas that were influencing my journey here.
If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. And you can even follow us on Instagram too. Radiant_light_podcast. And you can always reach out to us at radiantlightpodcast1, that's the number 1, @gmail.com.
How about you, Albert? Has the mindfulness practice helped you on your journey as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, before I was really considered a spiritual practitioner or whatever, I would say that mindfulness was sort of my foot in the door, sort of, because I see it as spirituality with all the trappings removed. It's kind of like spirituality light or something like that. It's kind of like just replacing. It's like when you say mindful, what do you mean? You mean you have to fill your mind to empty your mind. To get rid of all these thoughts, you have to replace them with something else. And so to do that, you need to cultivate the awareness. And the awareness is just a tool that you have, right? It's consciousness. So bare consciousness is non-judgmental. It has no opinion. It has no religion. It has no creed. It has no language. It's just bare consciousness. But then over the years, you kind of accumulate an identity or a self-image. And a lot of the times you take in things on yourself that aren't part of you, right? It's I don't like these things. I don't like this. I don't like that. I really hate these things. But then you kind of, when you start to practice mindfulness, you look back, you go, why would I hate these things? Well, it's because I felt that way at one time, and I've just let that sink in, and then it just becomes a habit at that point. So like you were saying before, mindfulness and meditation, they go hand in hand. I think meditation has more of a spiritual undertone, whereas mindfulness is kind of actually, it's one of the things in the Noble Eightfold Path, right? It's we have right speech, right conduct, and right mindfulness is one of them, right? I'm not going to name them all because we have that episode in the bag already.
The Noble Eightfold Path. That was episode 3, all the way back in episode 3, where we discussed the middle way and the Buddha's Eightfold Path. Yeah. Our listeners would need to delve well back into the archive for that one, but well worth a listen if you want to go a little bit deeper into the Buddhist aspects of what we're talking about there. But continue, Albert.
Yeah, like for those people who already know something about it, I had no idea about it. And my first experience, I'll kind of tell you this story. It's a little bit funny. So when I had moved back to Canada, one of the times I've been back and forth from Sweden and Canada many times, and kind of always building up more and more stress with each time, because I was just like, do I want to live here? Do I want to live there? Do I want to? It was kind of just tearing me apart in a sense. Funny, we didn't even ever talk about this, so this is new. I've been saving
all the
this
things
story.
we have talked about as well. Yeah. Wow, you'd have thought that would have been top of the list. But...
I would have too, but I didn't even. When he said mentioned mindfulness, Shawn, it started to bring back. Oh yeah, mindfulness. I've been practicing mindfulness since a while. Like before I was interested in Buddhism, before I really got into the Bible, even it was like one of the first things I tried was this cognitive behavioral therapy, and I went to see a gentleman by the name of Bruce. I can't remember his last name.
Wasn't Lee by any chance, was it?
There you go. But anyway, I go to this guy and I'm thinking, we're going to do this talk therapy and he's going to help me fix all my problems and answer all my questions, right? I'm like, this guy's going to tell me how to fix my depression, my anxiety, my stress, all this stuff. And I sit down with this guy and I swear to God, he red-pilled me that day, man. He red-pilled me. And you know how he did it? With a raisin. He red-pilled me with a raisin. And I go like this. Bruce, I'm terribly stressed. I have this terrible problems in my life. So much stress, so much problems. And he's just like this. I can help you with that. And I go, really? You're going to help me? I was a little skeptical. And then he just pulls out a fucking raisin and hands it to me. And he says, how does this raisin feel in your hand? And I go, what, are you going to cure me with a raisin? Come on, man. He's just like, just give me a chance here, okay? I go, okay, all right. And I recommend this exercise to anyone who's listening because it's in this book he gave me as well. It's the Mindful Workbook. You can't really see it here. It's a really good book. But anyway, it's the first exercise. And he says, just feel the raisin in your hand. What is it? What's the sense of the weight of the raisin? I go, I don't really feel the raisin in my hand. It's too light. And he go, okay, put it in your mouth then. I say, okay. I put it in my mouth. He goes, but don't chew it. I'm like, okay. And I'll tell you something. The urge to chew a raisin, especially if you're hungry, you don't realize that you have these urges that are just like controlling you until you try this exercise. You put it in your mouth and it just sits there and you go, no, just suck this raisin for a minute. I go, in my head, I'm thinking, this fucking guy's got me sucking a raisin and I'm paying him like how much money? I was just a little bit like butthurt about it. But as he's just like, close your eyes and suck the raisin. How does it taste? How does it feel? What's the sensations? Do you feel like the saliva in your mouth? Is it squishy? Is it hard? Is it all these things you're trying to like focus on this raisin? And before you know it, I wasn't thinking about the stress, the problems, all the bullshit I had going in there. By the end of the thing, I was just like, I'm just sucking on a raisin, man. Like that was my whole moment, right? That perfect. And I swallowed it. And then he just like, I opened my eyes. He's smiling at me. He's like, so what do you feel? I'm like, I'm pretty fucking relaxed, dude. I think you just red pilled me. And ever since then, I wouldn't say I was like a believer just then and there, but that was the initial seed that this whole thread kind of goes back to. So now I'm like all into Zen and we're doing this podcast and mindfulness is like a part of my everyday moment to moment kind of life. But it all kind of went back to that experience. I kind of find it as a funny story, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. It links in so nicely as well with what we said right at the top of the show about the cup of coffee. You know, in this instance, it's a raisin. You're mindfully eating the raisin, concentrating on the flavor and the texture of that raisin, and poof, all your thoughts and bad thoughts that were disturbing you have just disappeared like that. incredible.
I was going to say, I'm really glad that you brought this up, because I've tried this similar exercise. I didn't have a raisin available though, so I tried it with a piece of chocolate. And yeah, if you think the desire to eat a raisin is strong, like when you have a piece of chocolate just sitting in your mouth and melting, resisting the urge to chew is very difficult. And again, you realize all these sensations, because again, same sort of principle with the cup of tea. Like, you don't, oftentimes you just do things automatically, and especially something sweet like candy or a raisin, you just eat them, kind of mindlessly. You're getting that sugar rush. But then when you actually stop and reflect on it, you're mindful of it, there's a lot of sensations that you hadn't realized before. Maybe the way it tingles in your mouth, or the way that you have this urge, this desire to keep chewing. So I think it's probably a good way too to practice, being able to meditate, trying to, I don't know if resist. I don't think resist is the best word. I don't think they would advocate you're resisting the urge, but you're being mindful of it. Yeah, you're observing it. So it's the same thing. I've been trying to meditate. So I guess there's the two sort of phases here. There's the first step of becoming more mindful and trying to be more aware of your own mental processes. And then after that, you can take it to the next level and start meditating. So I think the first step I've been making some progress with, but the second step of actually meditating, like I really struggle. I'm making some improvements though, but I always thought to myself, I would try meditating and then I wouldn't go well, and I would say, oh, it's just not for me. Like, oh, my mind is too chaotic. Oh, it's my ADHD. Oh, I can't focus. Oh, I can't sit still. Always have some sort of, excuse, reason why it wasn't working. But I've been trying to do it more mindfully, and it's still a struggle. I'm not going to say it's easy. I'm not going to say that all of a sudden magically I'm, all zen and free of thoughts. No, I put on a timer, and sometimes it takes a whole 15 minutes just to clear my head. But that's a big part of it too, right? Is recognizing these thoughts, and instead of just letting the thoughts carry you, just recognize them and say, okay, I'm having this thought. Maybe it's about something I did or something I have to do, an obligation, chores, like some school work, something like this. And you have this thought and you realize, okay, it's coming to my mind, and then trying to let it go, just like that, being mindful of that urge to chew the raisin or the chocolate. So I think there's kind of a connection there with meditation too.
Yeah, it's kind of like you have these thoughts that come to you, and after a while, once you get I'm not that I'm the big guru of meditation or anything, but after a while, once you have been meditating and you've learned to observe these thoughts, you kind of get to a point where you're like, oh yeah, I always have that thought and I always act this way. Why don't I just not do that this time? Why don't I act a different way in response to that thought? And hopefully over time, you get improvements in your behavior as a result. Hopefully.
It's like an impulse, right? You just don't always follow the impulse. I mean, that goes with everything, right? But
I'm sure there's an expression for this, but it's kind of like the road to improvement isn't just one steady uphill climb. It's full of ups and downs and peaks and troughs. There's going to be occasions when you slip back into old habits. If you're mindful of it and you're aware of your behavior, like, oh yeah, I've started doing that again. Just repivot myself, realign a little bit, and go in this new direction that I wish to take.
Yeah, I just want to caveat that thing you said about meditation being difficult. The one meditation I started with in this Mindful Way workbook here, it's instead of just trying to empty your mind, like I said, you have to fill it with something else. So they call it a body scan, and you just lay down in the bed and you like breathe in, and then you imagine the air is like filling your toe, and then you empty your toe, and then you breathe in again, you empty like your ankle, and you breathe out, and it just like scans your whole body. And then each breath, each time you do it, you get more like lost in I used to fall asleep, unfortunately. Like I got so relaxed that it was like almost too much of a good thing, and I'd fall asleep and I'd wake up and I'm like, shit, I only made it to the nipple this time, or I only made it to my like hip. But the benchmark got like better each time, and then eventually I could do the whole, it's like a 30-minute thing. But I think I could have done that in the beginning, but I couldn't just like sit and meditate. I was way too chaotic. So
I'll have to look into that particular practice.
Yeah, they're on YouTube. Just body scan. Just type body scan. And I think that one helped me at least. It's not one size fits all, but like I do think mindfulness is a good sort of foot in the door towards meditation or any of that kind of stuff.
And full disclaimer, meditation is hard. It's like, if you've never practiced it before, it may sound easy on the tin, or what, you just sit there and stay still, but you realize how much of a kind of monkey brain we have, like, oh, got the impulse to do this and that, but it's hard to just keep back to that step.
Sorry, just saying good night. That's like what you just were saying, dude. There's always a distraction. But that's the cool thing. You just like, okay, I got me this time, on to the next, and don't judge it. If it happens, so what? You just keep trying, and it gets better.
Well, I think that's the whole key to it, really, is just being able to accept your flaws, accepting that you're not good at this. Not many people are. That's kind of like, in my experience, like the base level point to move up from. But something I really wanted to pick up there on what you said a moment ago, Albert, was when you talked about how mindfulness, you saw the mind, you broke it down to just pure basic consciousness. I was sitting there thinking to myself, wow, when you break it down to just pure consciousness, like plain nothingness, you can kind of, how can I put this? With your mindfulness, you can design your avatar almost. Whatever you put into your brain, your thoughts, you're ultimately going to become. If you look at it as plain consciousness, that what you're consuming, visually, mentally, the stimulus that you put around yourself, you're going to become that kind of person.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want to get into too much vibrational type stuff, but it's like elevating your consciousness or whatever, right? It's, I have this book here. This is the father of mindfulness. His name is Thich Nhat Hanh, but it's the heart of Buddha's teachings. And he talks about, there's this image that I really referred to here. It's store consciousness and then the mind consciousness, and all the seeds are at the bottom. So everyone's consciousness has the seed of hate, the seed of love, the seed of greed, the seed of joy, the seed of everything, right? It's like what everyone's consciousness has the potential to be, and like certain seeds grow, and then the mindfulness is what keeps you from basically watering the bad seeds and keeps you watering the good seeds. And you do that by using the mindfulness. The mindfulness is the most important tool. I think this gentleman was the one who came to the States back in the 60s during the Vietnam War. He was
I was actually going to say, he did the introduction for this book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go.
Maybe I'll have to check out this one. Go to like the original source there. But you're sorry to hijack your comment, but I just thought that was interesting, the connection there, because Kabat-Zinn, he was part of the anti-war movement, and he was a PhD student in molecular biology at MIT. And MIT had a pretty big anti-war sort of movement there. I mean, that's where Noam Chomsky was. So, Chomsky, right. Some of these really, really big figures were leading the anti-war movement in kind of like the universities in the northeastern United States. And I guess it's just interesting to see all of these connections. So he comes over, like and he's Vietnamese, and then he comes and gets involved with these anti-war protesters, and then he ends up, teaching Buddhism to, different academics, ends up teaching Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Yeah, I mean, he was a pretty known figure at the time. Martin Luther King Jr. even nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize and whatnot. But it's kind of like how the Japanese Zen guys, Suzuki and those guys, came over to California, and that it's all coming from. And now we have mindfulness is taught in certain schools and whatnot, which I think is great because it's like a secularized version of Buddhism that you can just like try and teach kids. Like they say about the Jedi, you got to start them young, right? Because it's harder the older you get to break those habits. Once you've been watering those bad seeds in your mind and your consciousness for so long, it's really hard to cut those back off. But I think that the non-judgment and the embracing with the mindfulness is the key to doing that. It really is. I'm a believer now, for sure.
Yeah, you bring up
I drink the Kool-Aid.
You bring up an interesting point though, because I like to have a balanced take on different different theories and ideas, and so I was trying to think of and look up some critiques of mindfulness, and it goes back to a comment you made a little bit earlier, saying that it's sort of like a simplified, I forget the exact phrase you used, but I liked it. You said it was like a simplified version or a kind of a watered down version of Buddhism in a sense. And that's actually one of the criticisms that I came across, is that some people have been critical of Kabat-Zinn, saying he removed too much of the Buddhist influences. Again, it's such a like the aspects of compassion for all beings and trying to essentially, I guess, eliminate the sense of self. Some pretty core tenets there of Buddhism, right? So some people I know have been critical of this sort of secularization of the ideas that push it away from its original Buddhist values. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
I think that just helps to get the reach into places where you couldn't, because like Buddhism is considered a religion, and schools and certain places, government, are considered secular, so you're not allowed to preach about certain things. Not that I feel like Buddhism is like that, but it's at least this way you could kind of get it into certain places. There's certain areas of the structure of society, the infrastructure, where mindfulness has kind of started to root. It's not just about we got to get more people to believe in the Buddha or something like that. It's more about how are we going to create a society where people function better. And in order to do that, you have to be in the moment. That's the whole thing about this, right? It's like about being. And if we're a human being, we should be being instead of doing. If you're always doing, then you're thinking. And if you're thinking, you're going to be doing and thinking yourself further away from this moment where you're actually at, which is being in your body. I think the best way to just be in your body in that moment is to practice something like mindfulness. You could do martial arts, you could do yoga, you could do jogging, we've been through this before, obviously, but it's like, it's having a mindful approach towards the jogging or a mindful approach towards your job or whatever, right? And that's going to keep you from reacting impulsively and maybe negatively. Like, the only reason I can do that now is because I know that I've so often done the opposite things, where I've kind of bitten on those taunts, and someone tried to upset me and I was just like, oh, you want to upset me? Watch me be mad. And then I become a terrible person for a while. And then I'm like, I didn't have to act like that. It didn't improve the situation either. And it made me feel terrible. And I've probably made someone else feel terrible. And it just keeps this cycle going.
Well, that reminds me of an incident that happened to me recently. So I was going into a store, and I needed to, the employee was not present and had to like hit the buzzer, ring the bell kind of thing. And there's, hear people hit the buzzer, no one comes. Okay, just kind of waiting. Hit it again, still waiting. Then the employee comes, and he says, he's like, hey, he's like, I'm here. He's like, what you did was really rude. Like, this is like the fourth time this has happened today. Like, we can hear you in the back. Like, I'm taking my break. Do I have a right to take a break? Is that okay with you? And he comes off like this. And so I'm in a pretty good mood. This guy says this, and I can just feel the emotions kind of like rising in me. I can just feel myself like, wanting to maybe kind of snap a little bit, maybe tell him off and be like, oh, sorry, buddy, asking you to do your job. Like, so these are kind of the things that are coming up in my head. Like, like, how dare you speak to me like this? Like, I just rang a buzzer. Like, why are you exploding in my face?
I'm the customer.
Yeah, I'm the customer. Like, I'm here to give your business money. Like, sorry. So these are kind of the thoughts that are coming up in my head. Like, and I'm thinking, and I just feel this like kind of like this anger rising up inside of me. And then I just took like a deep breath, and I saw that I was feeling this way, and I thought to myself, okay, like, what is the next direction that this takes? So either A, I tell the guy off, I storm off, I tell him he's the one that's being rude to me. I'm the customer, you shouldn't be rude, yada yada. And I'm like, okay, if I do that, I'm gonna feel good in this moment. I'm gonna walk out of here and I'm gonna say, yeah, I told that guy off. But those interactions never make you feel better. Like, you dwell on them, right? Or at least I do. I've been in a similar situation, and maybe in the moment I was like, yeah, I told that person. But then the rest of the day I'm kind of like thinking about it, and it just makes you more tense. It makes you more irritated. And, it was the end of the day. It was like a Friday night. I was going to go, home with my partner and watch a movie. And so I was like, okay, if I do this, it's probably going to ruin my night. And then as well, the thought comes up too. I'm like, okay, well, the guy, he mentioned his break. I'm like, okay, maybe he's having a bad day. Obviously it's not just me. Like, obviously it's not an indictment on me as a person because I rang this bell too many times. I get that maybe that's annoying. Maybe he's on his break. Maybe he's having a bad day. And so I just kind of took a deep breath, and I said, you know what, I'm sorry. And then he kind of stormed off. But then a moment later, another employee came up and she said, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm really sorry that he acted like that, but we had someone like walk out and quit this morning. We're both doing a double shift. We're having a rough day here. Like, I'm sorry that he reacted like that. And I kind of just took a deep breath, and I said, you know what, that's okay. I see that you guys are having a tense time here. So, just apologize. I didn't mean to disturb his break. Let's just move on. And then she's kind of was like, oh, okay, cool. And that was that. And I walked out, and, I felt a bit tense in the moment, but I walked out and I felt good. I was like, you know what? I reacted in the best possible way. I reacted in a way that I didn't exacerbate my own emotions. I didn't get into a fight with this random, not a physical, but like a verbal argument with this random person in a store. What would that accomplish? It would make my day worse. It would make his day worse. So I walked out. I felt a little bit tense, but then took a few breaths. And by the time I got to the car, I was like, you know what? I feel a lot better with the way that I responded to this situation. And again, having, learning about mindfulness recently, I think has been helping me to respond in better ways to this sort of, stressful stimuli.
I love the way, as you was talking there, you changed the descriptive word from react to respond, because that is exactly what I was going to pick up on there. It sounds like in that incidence, mindfulness has enabled you to respond rather than react. Like, I associate the word react with a bit more like, wow, what are you doing? Why are you saying that to me? Like reacting from an ego position. Whereas by responding, it's a calmer communication, a more spiritual response, so to speak.
Thank you. I don't know if I consciously made that distinction in my language, but I guess the system of mindfulness is working. And again, like with this story, these sort of incidents, I think with mindfulness, and this kind of comes to another criticism that I read, because again, I'm trying to have a balanced take here. I did see some people say, some articles argue that, oh, mindfulness might just be a way to, promote being passive. Like if you, it can be a substitute. Oh, just be mindful, just let go of your emotions instead of standing up for things that are important in the world. Which I don't think was a really fair criticism, but I will address it.
Considering the guy was an anti-Vietnam War guy who
It's kind of funny because, people said, oh, it's just a way for, it's become really trendy and popularized in businesses as a way of, placating, people and making them less hostile and having them accept capitalism. And I think that there's it can be used that way. I would be very skeptical if I was in a company and I hated my job and the management was abusive, and then suddenly we had a mindfulness retreat. Yeah, I think that would be pretty condescending. But my point being is, I think it's also about understanding, which situations you have control over and which you don't. Which situations are worth standing up for yourself, which situations are worth, standing up for yourself, for others, vocalizing your concerns, and which situations where you can reflect and say, you know what, this is just going to cause more stress and anxiety for me, and it doesn't accomplish anything big. Right. So I think there is a distinction to be made there. It's not to say that every time you're feeling angry about something or upset, I mean, if there is legitimate injustice, you should stand up against it. If you're at work and you have an abusive boss and they, try to say, oh, just use mindfulness. It's like, no, well, your company is harming the mental health of people. This institution is not doing its part to try to support the whatever workers or students or individuals, right? So it's not to say that you should never stand up for yourself, but understanding when it would be productive and constructive for yourself and for others, and when, it's not going to be, like getting into an argument with a guy in a store.
Yeah, knowledge is knowing what to say, and wisdom is knowing whether or not to say it, right?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Thanks.
I kind of think that it's how you respond as opposed to whether you do or don't respond, right? Because it's like being polarized is, I think, a detriment to yourself as a sentient being or whatever, right? And if you go deeper into it and think of how the whole world is interconnected, and that's one thing that Han really talks about is interconnectedness. Like the leaf wasn't always a leaf, it was a seed at one point, and then it was like the rain that came down. He goes really into this poetically, and I think, well, that is true, right? So it's just like, if you can interfere with my inner peace, I don't have inner peace. I don't have it, because if you can interfere with it, it's not real. It's an illusion. It's just there because I've protected myself. If you can go into any situation and maintain your peace and still speak your truth and still speak up for those people who are being oppressed and whatnot, then you really have something that I would consider integrity. And you don't have to scream and start reacting in that way. I think it's better to calmly speak your mind, and then the truth will shine through all the BS. I don't want to swear it. I swore already, but it's like mindfully, right? Do I swear in this situation or do I not? Do I cuss somebody out or curse them or whatever? Or do I just say, look, I guess you're having a bad day. It's not my problem. If you want to talk about it, we can fix it. And just resolve problems as you go through life instead of just feeding into them. And I've seen, the more I get into the mindfulness, the more I'm noticing how unmindful everyone else is. And that's not to toot my own horn or anything. It's just the awareness is there, and I'm watching things without judging them. But I feel like, okay, can we tone it down and just, if we all took a day off, just one, even everything, war, factories, people driving, people talking on their phones, people scrolling, whatever, just one day, I think it could raise the vibration so much higher. But that's just idyllic thinking. But obviously from a moment to moment basis, that's what you want to like lead towards. That's what I'm trying to like gradually build towards, is like a life where every moment seems meaningful and productive, and not productive in the capitalist way, but productive in the just like I'm doing something that is improving the world kind of thing.
We gave that disclaimer right at the top of the show that, you know, we're beginners and this is a beginner's mindset thing. But I feel something we could probably add to that is that the whole reason that we're here today and that we've discussed mindfulness here on the Radiant Light podcast is we genuinely believe, I feel I can speak for all three of us here, is that mindfulness is something that will improve the world and is a good thing that we can encourage and put out there to people and whoever's listening to the product, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I said, I feel like it's been helpful in my own journey recently. And yeah, like I said, it shouldn't be used, it shouldn't replace action. And, you still have to stand up for yourself and others when the situation calls. But I think in terms of alleviating a lot of these, smaller anxieties, fears, worries that we have, I think it can be beneficial. And also, I think there's something to be said too about being present. And it's something that I've tried to work on, because I feel, it's human nature, but also our current society has exacerbated it, that people have often short attention spans. In our modern world too, our attention's constantly being divided. There's work and family, and then nowadays you have a mobile phone, and your boss is maybe texting you, and you bring work home with you, or you're looking at the news and flipping through whatever platform you use, TikTok, Instagram. There's just this constant bombardment of information, and I personally feel like a lot of the times I'm not present. I'm doing multiple things at once. I'm like listening to a podcast and I'm cooking. I'm listening to the radio and driving. I'm watching. Sometimes you're sitting down to watch Netflix, and then you're also scrolling on your phone at the same time. And it's like you're getting distracted from something that's already a distraction, right? Yeah. So I think there's something to be said about just trying to be present. Like, okay, I'm sitting down for dinner with my partner. We're going to put down our phones, and we're just going to talk, and we're just going to be here in the moment. I'm watching this movie. I'm going to try to commit to this movie, especially if it's something a bit more artistic. I'm going to try to commit to this. I'm not going to be flipping through my phone and looking up, what the next movie the director is going to do is. Maybe it could be as simple too as you're doing the dishes, and you just take that moment to just feel the sunlight and the feeling of the water on your hands, right? So I think there is also some value in trying to live these moments, because people often live in the past and the future, but there's not as much space for the present. And if you really think about it,
then you miss your whole life, right?
Yeah, the present is all that we really have, in a sense.
Yeah, there's some fantastic examples that you just gave there, Shawn. And another one I'd like to add to that I heard of was if you're, say, on a break at work and all the guys are laughing at a joke that's been cracked, as the laughter's dying down, before you just take that second to go back to your telephone and check Instagram or whatever, take a second to look back, and that guy who's laughing the hardest, really enjoy his enjoyment. Look at the whites of his eyes as he's like lighting up at the joke kind of thing. You can easily miss those little details that you can just like, oh wow, look, he's really happy right now. Enjoy his happiness.
Yeah, I think that's also good practice too. Yeah, take satisfaction in the enjoyment of others. Yeah, it's an important lesson.
Shawn, tell us some more about the actual history of mindfulness.
Yeah, so again, as we were discussing earlier, there is this distinction between mindfulness and meditation. And I think it's really important to note that most cultures around the world have practiced some form of meditation or another. One of the earliest references I could find dates back about 3,500 years to the Hindu Vedas. And about 2,500 years ago, there starts to be references in Jain texts, in Buddhist texts. And so there's pretty strong connections there between these forms of Hindu and Buddhist meditations and mindfulness. But as we were discussing earlier, there's different types of meditations. So I would be remiss to ignore the long history of meditation that other cultures have had. For example, in the Torah, it mentions there's mention of meditation with Isaac going out to the fields to reflect and contemplate. In Islam, Sufism has a strong tradition of meditation and using breathing exercises and chants to bring one's attention away from worldly affairs and to try to direct that towards, enlightenment, divine enlightenment. You see similar practices as well with different Christian monks and especially those that lived in more secluded areas. They were, they would practice forms of meditation using different chants and breathing techniques. So again, there's a very rich history there of meditative practices that span a variety of cultures around the world. However, sorry. Question?
So in these different cultures here, are all the cultures speaking of the same benefits of mindfulness, or do they vary from culture to culture?
Right. So that's a good point. So again, I wouldn't classify all of these practices necessarily as mindfulness in the same way that we perceive it today, but they did there were some similarities there. For example, trying to detach oneself from the physical world and focus on something more internal. Trying to bring one's awareness into one's own body in order to attain some sort of spiritual enlightenment, some sort of connection with God. So there's similarities in that regard. But again, there's a lot of differences too with our more modern form. And the more modern form, again, going back to this book, Full Catastrophe Living, a lot of the mindfulness-based researchers that have developed in the last few decades, really started in the 1970s in the West, a lot of their practices were adopted from older Buddhist traditions and Hindu traditions. So I came across this. There's the concept of sati, which comes from a Sanskrit word, which is translated as memory or the memory retention. And so it was first a concept that was used by Hindus, and later it was adopted into Buddhism. And it's tied to this concept of satipatthana. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but yeah, satipatthana, which was one of the central teachings of the Buddha. And so this literally, or more or less, translates as the establishment of mindfulness, being mindful and being in the moment. And so especially in Theravada Buddhism, this principle was applied to different domains. So being mindful of the body, being mindful of one's feelings, being mindful of one's mind, and also of one's practices in relation to the dharmas.
Imagine being mindful of your mind. That's kind of a trippy concept for sure.
Yeah, you can see why the hippies in the 1960s started to gravitate towards some of these philosophies there.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess that's the cool thing about the show is taking the approach okay, mindfulness is a Zen thing, but it's also found in these other religions. That's why we're interviewing people from other religions as well, finding the commonalities and just breaking it down to what's the most beneficial practices and what can we take from each one and learn from and grow.
So as we move on to kind of wrap things up now, has anybody got any last kind of points or any references that they wanted to make before we kind of move on to the previews of what's coming next on Radiant Light?
So I came across this when I was just going down the rabbit hole of mindfulness. And of course, we've discussed before that I lived in China. I've studied some Chinese, so I'm conversational. Like recently, I haven't had as many opportunities to speak, so I'm probably getting a little worse at it. But I came across this. So the word actually for mindfulness in Chinese is nian. In nian, there's two different parts. And this is one of the things that really fascinates me about Chinese. One of the things I love about Chinese is that oftentimes there's different radicals, there's different parts of a character, which are two separate words. And I shouldn't even say words. A lot of I think that's maybe one of the misconceptions. Maybe I should say concepts. Smaller characters are oftentimes concepts. And if you add them together, it can have a new word and new meaning that combines the two concepts of the different parts of the character. So in the character that I just shared there, Nian, the very top part, so it looks like almost like a little house or something. This is actually Jin, which means today or now. So Jintian means today in Chinese. Mm-hmm. And so the Jin part means, now, the present, today. And then the bottom part here, you can see there's four little lines. There's one long line and then three smaller lines there. So the top part is like Jin, which is today, now, present. The bottom part is Xin, which means heart. So you're taking now and heart and putting them together, which gives the word for mindfulness, which I guess could be kind of literally, if we look at the literal translation of the two parts of the character, would be, having heart in the moment. And so I saw that and I thought, well, first I just thought it was cool because Chinese is an interesting language, but then I also thought it was very, I don't know, it was very appropriate. Like it was, I think, a really, interesting concept that they would put now and heart together, and then that would be the term for mindfulness. And I think that really does, that is really indicative. It really reflects the principles of mindfulness right there.
That's a beautiful translation, putting your heart into the present moment. Wow.
That was a pretty good segue, right, Jimmy?
Yeah, that's a fantastic set. Yeah.
Let's go.
It's together more perfectly if you tried it.
Man.
Okay, so the current theme in the Radiant Light podcast is the present moment is what we're focusing on. And, we've looked at various festivals. As I said, I recently spoke to my good friend Siddharth on the episode of Diwali. Albert, you recently spoke to Dr. Herbert Basser, and we covered Yom Kippur as a religious festival. Shawn, Albert and I had a little surprise for you, a little mission, if you will. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to step out there into the matrix, a little bit like Albert and I have done recently. We termed them solo episodes, i.e. one member of the Radiant Light panel and a guest. Would you please be able to find us a guest to discuss Chinese New Year?
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. That's a really good idea. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Quite a few Chinese friends, and I'm sure one of them would love to be on the podcast. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, that's a fun one too, because I've got a lot of stories about Chinese New Year in China. It's obviously a very big deal. Yeah, I like it. I hadn't thought of that, but I think that would make for a really engaging episode.
Wow, awesome. I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased that you reacted that way as well, responded that way. You like what I did there? So pleased that you responded that way, because we were talking a little bit before we hit the record button, and I nearly blurted it out in that moment, but I really just hope you don't mind, wanted to save it here and get your live reaction here on the show. And it sounds like you're up for the challenge. Albert, moving on to yourself, you've got a big martial arts episode.
Oh, right. Yeah. So, Shawn, do you remember when we did the BJJ episode with Jamal? There was a gentleman I mentioned during that who practices Shastra Vidya, which is like an ancient Sikh martial art.
Okay.
So his name is Brad, and they had a seminar recently at Jamal's gym. So I'm going to have him on next weekend. And we're going to talk about Sikhism, Shastra Vidya, and just like general interesting topics, spirituality, martial arts. He seems like, I met him once, and he's a really like interesting guy, really passionate. He's actually a Caucasian dude who became Sikh as an adult. And I want to like find out more about how that all went down.
Well, so Albert, this episode is going to involve another link between martial arts and spirituality, like the Sikhism combined with martial arts. Wow.
Yeah, because he's like a judo black belt or maybe BJJ black belt as well, but he's taken up Shastra Vidya as like his project because it's a dying martial art. There's like only a few masters left, and if you go on Shastra Vidya's wiki page, his master is the guy that's named as like the one of the last true masters of Shastra Vidya. I think he lives in England. He's based out of England, but because of Brampton having such a strong Sikh community, he's always coming over and doing these seminars. And then that's the link with Jamal, and they do the seminars out of the Forge Martial Arts gym. So I just thought I have to. Yeah, I think I even said it in the BJJ episode. I'm like, I think I have to get Brad on the show. Like I just knew right then. I was like, I got to do this. But then I just reached out to him recently, and he said he'd love to do it.
So guys, until then, stay zen.
Okay, that appears to be all we have time for on today's episode. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. And you can even follow us on Instagram too. Radiant_light_podcast. And you can always reach out to us at radiantlightpodcast1, that's the number 1, @gmail.com. So until next time, good night, God bless, and namaste.